little project I need to do today. I was going to go over there and take care of it. Wouldn't take me probably about an hour or so, but then I got to thinking, you know what, this is something I probably should put down on film, because there's a lot of times people need their doors cut off in their house. Now this could be because they've put new laminate floor down, put new carpet down. A lot of times a door needs to be cut off, and how do you do that? It's a pretty simple process if you're a carpenter, but if you're not used to using saws, and if you're not used to working around material like this MDF board, it can be kind of complicated, and you can kind of really make a mess if you're not careful. So let me show you how I'm going to do this coming right up. Has some closet doors. They've become very difficult for her to open up and shut again because the carpet and the door rubs on the carpet, and it's just a strain to do it. Each time she tries to open it, it just seems like it's getting a little bit harder each time. Pop the doors off the hinges, take them outside, put them on some sawhorses, and cut, I'm thinking probably about a ½ inch off the bottom. Take them back in, reinstall them. Hopefully everything goes good. I want to show you this process on how I do this. Disclaimer right off the beginning. The one thing about YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, platforms like these, you'll see a lot of guys and gals use power saws as if it's no big deal. They almost kind of like present it as, hey, you can do this as the homeowner, no trouble. Well, I just want to stand up and say right now, anytime you start using a saw like this, it is a very dangerous operation, because you've got teeth on this saw, and they will cut. They'll cut anything they hit. So you got to be careful. So if you've never used a saw before, or you're a little intimidated by even thinking about how to use a saw, a long time ago, Home Depot and Lowe's started marketing do-it-yourself home improvement. And even back then, right off the bat, it bothered me. I've been a carpenter now for 40 years, and I know how dangerous tools like these can be. But they started marketing that anybody could run down, grab them a saw, and do anything they want with it. No problem. You can do this, right? To me, that's a very dangerous message they've been spreading for a long time. And I'm sure there's quite a few fingers that have been lost because of that message, just like that right there. So what I just want to do is I just want to be honest with you and just let you know that you could probably do this if you've worked around a saw before, and if you're extremely careful, and even then, mistakes will happen. Let me show you how I go ahead and cut down these doors, just in case you need to do it. Feel confident enough about using a saw like this right here. Oh, by the way, this saw I'm holding right now is unplugged. It's just not a good idea to be showing a saw off and talking about it and the blade and everything about it and to have it plugged in. Of course, this is getting pretty old school to even have a plug. Anymore, most of your saws are electric and they have batteries that go in them. I just haven't made that investment yet. I don't know if I'll make that investment, but they're pretty nice to have batteries. But once again, if you change the blade or you go to handling the saw and you're not actually going to use the saw, make sure you take that. So one of the first things that you want to know is that when you work with this MDF board, you're going to need a super sharp saw blade and one with a lot of teeth. The one I picked up for this project is going to be this one right here, this DeWalt, and it is a 60 tooth for fine, smooth cutting. This is what it's going to take to cut this MDF board. A lot of your framing saw blades have 24 teeth on them. If you try to use that, you might be able to get it to look good, but there's a good chance that when you have that much space between the teeth, it's probably going to chip the board a little bit, and it all depends how particular you are about your work. But if you want the best job possible, it'd be a good idea to go ahead and pick up something like this, a 60 tooth blade. This is a DeWalt. Price on it was about $45 for this blade. All circular saws are going to be different. This happens to be an Hitachi, and this is pretty old school. I've probably had this at least a couple decades or so. But on this particular saw right here, once again, I'm showing it to you, but it's unplugged. I'm going to keep stressing that. Make sure your saws are unplugged or the battery's out of them when you change the blade or you go to mess with them. This particular saw right here has a little button right here, and on that button you push that button in and out, and when you push that button in, it'll actually lock the blade so the blade will not spin, and that's how you put your tool on it, and you can break the nut loose, bring the old blade off, put the new blade back on. So I'm going to sit here and I'm going to go ahead and compress that button in right there. Your saw should come with a wrench. Take that on there like this, go down and break it loose. No big deal. You want to make sure you use the proper wrench. You'd have a real trouble if you strip this nut out right here. You'd have real trouble. You'd have to definitely go back to the factory and try to get you a new one. You'll also have a washer on it. And you bring your guard back and your blade comes right out. The saw cuts up. These teeth are spinning up. They cut up like that. So if you put your blade on like this, the blade is still going to turn this way and the teeth are going to do no good at all. You'll know you've made that mistake because your saw will instantly start to smoke. As soon as that blade hits the wood, it's just going to smoke because it's not going to cut because it's going the wrong way. So make sure when you put your blade on, your teeth, these teeth right here are facing up, and the blade will turn like this right here as it cuts. Here's a little bit of a side-by-side comparison of the two blades. This is the one I had in. Now this is a 24 tooth. You'll use this blade a lot for framing a wall up, for cutting 2x4s, things like that. It's not a trim saw, but it's a very good blade. I've enjoyed using this spider blade right here. If you look at the new DeWalt that I've just got, it has 60 teeth. So 24 and 60. And the more teeth you have, the finer cut that you're going to be able to make on that. So this DeWalt is going to work out pretty good for me. You want to make sure the same size. They're 7 1/4. Make sure your saw is a 7 1/4. Some of them have a little bit smaller blades these days, so make sure you get the right blade. Once again, I want to make sure my teeth are going to cut up. It's going to cut this way. Counterclockwise, the blade is going to turn. Go ahead and set the blade back in there. You have your washer that you took off. You want to be sure and put it back on. That point right there, you want to go ahead and put the nut on. And you want to get it pretty snug. I will share one little story on the job that I had years and years ago, but this will kind of just cement the idea of how dangerous these saws are, and just you have to be extremely careful. When you cut rafters, a lot of guys, there's certain cuts that are very hard to make. So it was a practice years ago, and I hope nobody does it anymore, but there's probably a lot of people out there that will still do this. But when you cut a rafter, all saws have a guard on them. And this is called the guard right here. This covers up your blade. Well, it was common practice to take this guard and pin it. A piece of wood and wedge this so it can't go back forward, or they'll actually take a little piece of wire and they'll tie this guard up. And that way when they're using their saw, they can make all their intricate cuts that they need to make, and they're not constantly trying to fight this guy. Well, I work with a guy, and he's a younger guy. We were building a house, and one day I walked up, and he had his guard, had a piece of wood shoved in there and had his guard pinned. And I told him, I said, no. I said, take that piece of wood out of there right now. And he tended to argue with me and said, well, it takes too long to cut them left and right and everything. But it was my job, and I told him, take it out or pack your tools up. Well, he understood, and he took the piece of wood out, and he continued to cut it like he should. Probably 6 months went by and the two crews kind of split up, and this guy actually jumped ship and went on to another crew that were building homes across the street. Got there one morning, started working on the outside of the house, and all of a sudden I heard a guy running a saw across the street. All of a sudden I heard the guy just yell out, just scream. Dropped my tools, ran over as fast as I could, ran up on him. He's sitting on the ground, and his thigh, his right thigh, his pants leg, his jeans are cut wide open, and his right thigh is cut completely open. As soon as I looked at it and I saw what had happened, and I looked over next to him, and there was his saw. It was what they call a worm drive saw, very powerful skill saw like this. There it was laying there with a piece of wood wedged in it with little pieces of meat hanging off of it. Now, I know that sounds pretty gross, and I'm sorry if that offends you, but this is the kind of the reality of working around power tools. As soon as I looked at that saw, I looked up, and that old boy that used to work with me was looking at the saw. He looked at me. We didn't even have to exchange words. He knew right off the bat what had happened right there. And went over there to that saw, grabbed that piece of wood, and threw it off there. Why'd he do it? Well, for one thing, that's a huge liability. If the medics would have got there before that and they would have saw that, they would have took pictures of it, his company probably would have been sued over something like that. You don't want to modify any kind of a tool to make it easier to cut something. Just learn how the tool works in a safe manner and kind of go from there. My new saw blade on. I'm going to run over. We're going to take these doors off. These doors are extremely heavy. I can't believe, it always surprises me how heavy these doors are. A full solid wooden door would not be as heavy as these doors are. Take them outside, cut them. I think I've got 2 or 3 to do. Take them back in, pin them back up. I'll show you the process. Okay, here's the project for today. We've got a couple doors right here that are very hard to open up. We're going to go ahead and cut a 1/2 inch off the bottom and see if that'll make a big difference. 1/2 inch, 3/4, somewhere in that area right there. Now what I use to take that door pin out is just a regular nail set, a hammer, and you got to be sure when you take your pins out, you got to watch, because a lot of times they'll have some black graphite on them, and you want to be able to put those on a drop cloth or put those on a rag, because if you set this pin down on white carpet like this, it's going to make a mess. It's going to make a stain, and you don't want that. You always want to wear gloves because they'll make your hands black, because these MDF doors are the heaviest doors I've ever found. Almost feels like it's solid steel, it's so heavy. So I'm going to go ahead and get this door outside. We're going to do some cutting. Mark off. In this particular case, I'm going to cut 1/2 inch off the bottom of this door. I like to use the painter's tape on the door where my saw is going to slide along the door, just to make sure there's no scratches that'll show up on this surface. Makes it pretty nice, and then I'll just run my saw right along the tape edge right here, which will work out pretty good. Now there's several different ways you can run your saw. One would be to run it this way here, but I don't like to run my saw with most of the saw hanging over the edge. You got the heaviest part of your saw that's sitting on the door itself. So I'll run it this way, and then I'll put my guide, my saw guide right here. Then it's a good idea to always check your measurement. The reason why it's so important to use a saw guide is because I'm going to start this cut at only about 3/8 of an inch down. I'm going to make one cut. I'm going to lower my saw blade a little bit farther, about halfway through the door. Make a second cut. I'll set my saw blade far enough where it'll cut completely through the door and make the final cut. So I'll actually be making 3 cuts. With a saw guide, I'll know I'll be exactly the same each time I run it through. The saw will run through the door. That's very important in MDF board, is that you do it this way. If you try to cut it all in one cut, you take a chance of it wanting to splinter and wanting to make a mess on your door, and then you have a problem. You got to sand it down and paint it and do all kind of things. I'm hoping this will turn out where I don't have to do any painting, maybe a little sanding, and I'll be done. There's the depth that I'll start the first cut with right there. Once I make all those adjustments and I'm ready to go make that first cut, now I'll actually plug my saw in. Okay, so that cut went pretty good. That was cutting through the door 3 times to finally get the final cut where I went all the way through. Start to take off your painter's tape. Take it off real easy, especially the first piece next to the cut, because if there are any tiny little splinters, if you rip it off, you're liable to rip the splinters off with it. Slowly but surely pull that away. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that finish right there. That's the kind of finish that you need to try to get. Just a razor edge finish, no chips coming out of it. If you don't follow the process, you're going to have a mess. I tried to rip it through one time with a 24 tooth blade. You're going to have chips all up and down. These doors are heavy duty, but they're very fragile finish on them. You have to be able to know how to cut them in order for it to work right. So let me go ahead and install this one and see how it works. Okay, that turned out pretty good. Let's go ahead and cut the other one off. You got to be careful when you handle a door, when you're walking through a home, that you make sure you don't hit the walls, hit the other trim. Just move slow. Always put a drop cloth down. and just take your time. Very important, just to take your time. Let's get that other door cut off. Hey, I appreciate you coming to the channel. That's LAF Space Film Fest, capital LAF Space Film Fest. Hey, if you would, hammer down that subscribe button. I appreciate it. Helps me to do little projects like this. In case you have doors that are dragging, you want to cut them off, be careful. Keep all your fingers intact. Watch those saws. They are very dangerous. Okay, that project turned out pretty good. Got the doors cut off. They seem to work a lot better. Back and forth, no problem. Happy with that. Remember to do the process. Cut it 3 times. Lower your saw each time before the final cut will cut through. Be sure and mask the door up and get you a good saw blade. Get you at least a 60-tooth saw blade cut through it. If not, you're going to have a mess. You're going to have a lot of splinters. I hope this helps you out. Be careful if you use those saws. Have a good day.